Good evening, cohort. As an educator in 21st century, we are faced with increasing high technology. Are we really ready for technology? This is the first question that we have to think about. In this activity, I will interview three teachers to gather their thoughts and technology applied in their classroom. Mr. Hassan, a computing teacher and IT integrator who helps students integrate technology in a safe and effective manner. Mr. Megatroid, a humanity teacher in secondary. And Mr. Magicia, an IGCSE coordinator, and he was kindly giving me a very detailed teaching plan as well as show me how he tracks students' assessment and progress. I started to send the email to the interview teacher with 7 questions before the interviews. They all respond to every questions with detailed information and long statement. But by thinking of time limitation, I just select 3 of those questions as my main concerns. And I also trimmed some of the video clips because it is too long to watch.
I use things like the BBC Microbit. It allows me to use programming so students can see their results straight away. I also use software as well. So we use a variety of software such as Adobe Photo Suite. We use Office 365. We use software like ManageBack as well to record student results. Also use OneNote. OneNote allows me to share resources with students. Also have access to iPads.
Quizlet. So this is Quizlet, and you kind of just generate quizzes, and then there's different ways that students can revise. They can do like flashcards, or you can do tests, and that's one way really to get them understanding basic terminology. I use Cognity. Cognity is very common, and that's almost replacing the old textbooks. There's also ways that you can test students on Cognity.
We are an Apple school, so tend to use our MacBooks quite frequently using Apple TV and AirPlay. In addition to that, tools such as YouTube for multimedia clips. In addition to using Microsoft SharePoint and OneDrive, we tend to use things like AirPlay and AirDrop.
I think the advantages of using technology means that it's instant. For example, all my resources are all saved on the cloud. So if my laptop stops working one day, for example, I can still use another device to access it, whether it's an iPad or a tablet or a desktop.
But there's a lot more points of views out there. People from different backgrounds, people from different perspectives are on social media pushing their different points of view. So I think it allows scope for kind of critical analysis more than used to. It's not the kind of, the teacher, the expert at the front now. The information is coming from the internet from a wide range of perspectives, and I think that's good. It has its flip side in terms of, it's kind of what we suppose in today's society we call fake news. A lot of information out there which hasn't been filtered, it hasn't been approved, it hasn't been checked, and it's being presented as real information. And so that's a kind of danger of kind of misinformation.
In terms of pros, certainly for a more interactive educational experience, using multimedia, for example, enabling kids to develop their research skills, to delve deeper into topics that are either of interest to them or we need to make of interest to them. Certainly the technology certainly helps with that. In terms of cons, obviously there's always dangers of using things like the internet, using computers, risks of students being off task, students accessing material that may not be appropriate, either age appropriate or maybe they're accessing material which they don't fully understand, and therefore we do run then risks of issues around academic integrity or plagiarism.
Trackers for each unit whereby I've listed all the levels that each student can achieve, and by working their way through each of the different tasks per lesson, they can tick things off and they can see what they've achieved and what they need to achieve as well. Hopefully, sort of getting them to aim for a higher level. In terms of tracking also, I have a spreadsheet where I can log all the data into, and again it clearly shows me whether students are making progress or not. Even with their test results as well, I can put information into a spreadsheet where I've broken down each of the questions and then given them a colour code, and I can see where students have performed well and then they haven't performed well, and then based on that analysis I can then go back and then revisit some of the theory.
Microsoft Excel, they kind of track their progress. You could also do it on ManageBackers now. It'll kind of break down the different tasks, and if you insert the tasks properly, you can identify which skill is being tested, and then when the feedback comes, you can also see, okay, well, they did well in this assessment on this skill, but not so well in that, and then you track it over a period of time, and that allows you to change your teaching. If you know, student X is scoring poorly on skill Y, then that's a way you can support that student.
Okay, so this is the spreadsheet I've built, which takes into account our IGCSE results for this academic year. So this is just a landing screen, which will give the headline information. A lot of this data here will be fed from some of the other sheets on the spreadsheet. So this screen is a subject overview, which I've already populated with syllabus codes, subjects, and number of entries for each subject. So then it's now set up as if I were to put in, for example, some hypothetical data. 6 candidates are entered for art. If their grades were 2 A stars, 2 A's and 2 B's, we can see here that it's calculated the percentage A star to C, percentage A star to A star to B. There's a check feature in here to make sure that I've put in the correct number of grades. So it's checking the fact there's 6 grades there, the 6 entries that they're showing as true. Okay, so one of the units we looked at with Year 9 last year was on natural hazards. The whole idea was it was a group task. So we set them up with a unit plan. So questions to consider, a selection of natural disasters they could look at, and then the task itself, which was a comparison task, forcing the students to use more higher order thinking skills, mainly in analysis evaluation, as well as looking at content that we taught them in light of different scenarios of their own choosing. They then had to think about the response that the government and various other stakeholders made to that particular scenario, and then take a decision as to whether that was an appropriate response or not, or whether they feel something else, something different, something better could have happened. They were given an outline action plan of week by week or activity by activity, the kinds of things they should be doing in their teams, and the idea was they self-managed. They were given information about what the assessed output would be, so it would be a video newsreel as well as an infographic, and each had a slightly different purpose. Again, information there about the judgment, the higher order thinking skills that they were required to use, and then we provided them with an assessment rubric which was on ManageBack. What we did was give them this outline action plan to use, which was then popped onto ManageBack for the students. They were then responsible for keeping this up to date. So what most of them chose to do was to set this up in a OneDrive file, which they gave each of their team members write access to. The teachers were given access to as well, so we could monitor this as we were going along. And the students were basically required to keep a log, lesson by lesson, of what they were intending to do, what they did end up doing, who was responsible. Therefore, they could keep each other in check, and they were accountable to.
So by ISTE standards, these teaching plan activities are as follows. And my suggestions for this lesson plan are: And also, these interviews allowed me to put together my own technology checklist.